A religion has always claimed to answer the biggest questions: why we exist, what our purpose is, and what happens after death. But how those answers are formed, and more importantly, how they are defended, is often not based on reason or evidence. It's based on faulty logic. When you strip religion down to its core arguments, what remains is a pattern of fallacies, logical errors that don't hold up under scrutiny. Let's start with one of the most common fallacies used to defend religious belief: the argument from ignorance. This fallacy works like this: because we don't fully understand something, a religious explanation must be true. If science doesn't have a complete explanation for the origin of life, then it must be God. If consciousness is still a mystery, it must be divine. This is like saying that because you don't know who ate the last cookie, it must have been a ghost. Just because something is unknown doesn't mean a specific answer is right, especially not an ancient one made up before modern understanding even existed. This fallacy is used a lot because it's emotionally satisfying. Not knowing is uncomfortable. Certainty feels better, but the truth doesn't care about how it makes us feel. Claiming an answer just to fill the gap is how humans have gotten things wrong again and again. From thinking thunder was caused by angry gods to believing diseases were punishment for sins. Another common fallacy is the appeal to tradition. Religion often survives not because of its evidence, but because it's been around for a long time. People say things like, "This belief has lasted thousands of years," as if that makes it more likely to be true. But bad ideas can last just as long as good ones. Bloodletting was a common medical practice for over 2,000 years. That didn't make it effective. It just made it entrenched. Longevity is not proof of validity. Closely tied to this is the bandwagon fallacy. The idea that something must be true because many people believe it. Billions of people believing in a religion doesn't make it true. At one point, almost everyone believed the earth was flat. Popularity isn't a measure of truth. It's just a measure of how widely something has been repeated. Let's look at the appeal to authority. Another tool used in religious circles. Religious texts are often treated as if they are beyond question. Statements from religious leaders are taken as facts, even if there's no evidence behind them. It's not that all authority is bad, but when someone claims authority without the burden of proof, that's a problem. A claim is only as good as the evidence behind it, no matter who says it. If someone told you that invisible fairies lived in their backyard, you'd want proof, not credentials. Many religions also rely on circular reasoning. They say the scriptures are true because they are the word of God, and they know God exists because the scriptures say so. This is like using a map to prove the map is accurate, without ever stepping outside to check. It's a closed loop that never connects with reality. The conclusion is assumed in the premise. Then there's the false dilemma, which shows up all the time in debates about religion. It's the idea that either a religious claim is true, or there's no meaning to life at all, or either God created the universe, or it came from nothing. But these aren't the only options. The universe can have meaning without divine intervention. Life can be valuable without eternal reward. This black and white thinking ignores the complex reality we actually live in. Another tactic is the special pleading fallacy, where religious beliefs are given exceptions that nothing else gets. When contradictions or logical holes are pointed out, the defense is often that God works in mysterious ways, or faith doesn't need evidence. That's special treatment. If someone made an extraordinary claim, like saying they could fly or talk to the dead, and then said, "You just have to believe," it wouldn't be accepted. But when the claim is religious, suddenly it's supposed to be off limits. Truth doesn't need special exceptions. It either stands on evidence or it doesn't. There's also a persistent non sequitur in religious arguments, conclusions that simply don't follow. For example, the universe is complex, therefore it must have been designed. That conclusion doesn't follow. Just because something is complex doesn't mean it was designed. Snowflakes are incredibly intricate, but we know they form naturally. Complexity can arise without conscious intent. Just because we see patterns doesn't mean there's a pattern maker. And then we have emotional appeals, where belief is defended not with logic, but with fear or hope. Fear of hell, hope of heaven, comfort in thinking a loved one is still out there. These are powerful feelings, but they don't make a belief true. Wanting something to be true doesn't make it so. If someone believed their lottery ticket would win because they really hoped it would, that wouldn't change the odds. Emotions can be misleading. They are real, but they don't define reality. Some religious apologists use the moral argument, the claim that without religion, there would be no morality. But morality has existed before and outside of religion. Studies show that even young children, too young to have learned any theology, show signs of empathy, fairness, and concern for others. Moral behavior isn't exclusive to religious people. In fact, some of the most religious societies also have some of the worst records on human rights. Morality is not handed down. It's built up through experience, cooperation, and empathy. Let's talk about confirmation bias, which fuels so many religious beliefs. It's the tendency to only notice things that support what you already believe and ignore everything else. If something good happens, it's seen as an answer to prayer. If something bad happens, it's either a test of faith or part of a mysterious plan. Everything becomes proof. And when everything is proof, nothing is. Real evidence needs to be testable and falsifiable. You have to be able to say what would disprove your belief. Otherwise, you're just interpreting the world through a filter. Miracle claims are often examples of post hoc reasoning. The idea that because something happened after a prayer or religious ritual, that must have caused it. But correlation isn't causation. People recover from illnesses all the time, with or without prayer. If someone prays and then gets better, it doesn't prove anything unless you can rule out all other explanations. Otherwise, you're just connecting dots that might not be connected. The argument from design is one of the oldest, that because the world is so well suited for life, it must have been created for it. But this gets things backward. Life adapted to the world, not the other way around. Evolution explains how complex life forms emerged without a designer. Saying the universe was fine-tuned for us is like standing in a puddle and thinking the hole was made just for it. It fits the shape because it conformed to it, not because it was built for it. Religion also leans heavily on anecdotal evidence, personal experiences that are treated as undeniable truth. Someone feels a presence while praying or has a vivid dream, and it becomes proof of the divine. But personal experience isn't reliable as evidence. Our brains are full of cognitive biases and are easily tricked. People from all religions report the same kind of experiences, even though their beliefs contradict each other. They can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. And then there's cherry picking. Religious texts are full of contradictions, but believers often highlight the parts that sound nice and ignore the rest. Passages about peace and love are quoted frequently. The violent, cruel, or absurd parts are explained away or forgotten. But if a book is supposed to be the word of a perfect being, it shouldn't need an editor. You shouldn't have to skip parts to make it sound moral. There's a fallacy known as begging the question, and it quietly sneaks into religious thinking. It happens when someone assumes the very thing they're trying to prove. For example, saying the Bible is true because it's the Word of God assumes both that God exists and that the Bible was written by Him, without proving either. It's like claiming a suspect is guilty because they were at the scene of the crime, and then using that as proof that they committed the crime. The logic goes in circles. Another subtle fallacy is the Texas sharpshooter. It comes from the image of someone shooting randomly at a barn and then drawing a bullseye around the tightest cluster of holes. Religious believers often look for patterns in hindsight. A vague prophecy is declared fulfilled after something happens, even if that prophecy could have meant anything. This is cherry-picking events after the fact and acting like it was all meant to be. But predictions have to be specific and verifiable before the event to mean anything. Otherwise, it's just retrofitting. The no true Scotsman fallacy is also common. When religious believers do something immoral, wars, abuse, discrimination, others will say, well, they weren't true believers. But this redefines the group to exclude anything that makes it look bad. If a Christian commits a crime, some will say they weren't a real Christian, but if they do something good, they're praised as a shining example of the faith. This double standard protects the belief system from criticism by disowning anything negative after the fact. Religious apologists often rely on loaded language, words meant to stir emotion rather than convey truth. Words like holy, sacred, or blessed are used to shut down critical thinking. When something is called sacred, it becomes untouchable. But labels don't make ideas immune to scrutiny. Calling something sacred doesn't make it rational. It just makes people afraid to question it. Then there's the tactic of moving the goalposts. This happens when someone changes the criteria for belief every time they're challenged. If you disprove a literal interpretation of Scripture, it's suddenly metaphorical. If a prophecy fails, it's reinterpreted. If prayers go unanswered, they were answered in an unseen way. This constant shifting means the claim can never really be tested or falsified. It becomes slippery, impossible to pin down, which makes it useless as a truth claim. We should also talk about Pascal's wager, which isn't exactly a fallacy, but often functions like one. The argument goes, if God exists and you believe, you win eternal reward. If you don't believe and you're wrong, you risk eternal punishment. So, it's safer to believe just in case, but belief isn't a switch you can flip out of fear. You can't make yourself believe something just because it's safer. And more importantly, which God are you betting on? There are thousands of religions, each with different rules. Believing in the wrong one could be just as risky. By this logic, it's a gamble no matter what. So, belief shouldn't be based on fear. It should be based on evidence. Religious systems also rely on mystification, where confusion is mistaken for depth. Complex theological ideas are often so vague and layered that they sound profound but say very little. Words are piled onto each other. Eternal grace through divine atonement and the presence of infinite love. But what does that actually mean? It's like a cloud of incense. It smells important, but it obscures more than it reveals. Real explanations clarify. They don't confuse. There's another logical sleight of hand called compartmentalization. Believers often live rational, evidence-based lives. Except when it comes to religion, they use science when choosing medical treatments, reason when managing money, and logic in most parts of life. But religion is given a pass. It lives in its own box, separate from scrutiny. But truth doesn't require a special compartment. If an idea can't survive outside of its bubble, that's not a sign of strength, that's a warning. It's also worth looking at how religion handles dissent. Many belief systems treat doubt not as a natural part of thinking, but as a threat. Questioning is discouraged. This creates an environment where people don't explore or challenge their beliefs, even if they privately have doubts. That's not how you find truth. That's how you maintain control. Any system that punishes skepticism is more interested in obedience than understanding. Let's consider the slippery slope argument, often used in religious moral debates. It claims that if one thing is allowed, say, same-sex marriage, it will inevitably lead to something extreme, like marrying animals or destroying families. But this exaggerates consequences without evidence. It's not logical. Allowing one thing doesn't mean all boundaries collapse. Rational societies draw lines all the time. Just because you allow a new right doesn't mean you abandon all standards. Religion also tends to treat subjective experience as universal truth. Someone feels a spiritual presence and assumes it must be a sign that their specific belief system is right. But people across all religions report similar feelings. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Buddhists. If those experiences point to conflicting truths, they can't all be correct. More likely, these are neurological experiences shaped by culture and expectation, not divine messages. Just because something feels meaningful doesn't mean it reflects external reality. Some believers argue from the incredulity fallacy. I can't imagine how this could have happened naturally, so it must be God. But a lack of imagination is not proof. Just because something is hard to understand doesn't mean a supernatural explanation is right. Saying, I don't know, therefore, God shuts the door on real inquiry. It's a dead end dressed up as an answer. Religious arguments also often use equivocation, where the same word is used in multiple ways to make a point seem stronger than it is. For example, using faith to mean both trust based on experience, like faith in a friend, and blind belief without evidence. This blurs the lines and makes irrational belief seem more reasonable than it is. If you say you have faith in gravity, it's because it's been tested. But when people say they have faith in God, it's often without evidence, and pretending the two are the same is dishonest. Then there's the idea of divine justice, which often includes the belief that everyone ultimately gets what they deserve. This creates a psychological comfort that bad people will be punished and good people rewarded. If not now, then in the afterlife. But this belief can lead to dangerous thinking. It implies that suffering in this life might be deserved, that poor people must be lazy, that victims are being tested. It discourages compassion and social reform because it shifts responsibility to a cosmic plan. Belief in divine justice often replaces actual justice. A related fallacy is the just world hypothesis, the mistaken idea that the world is fair and things happen for a reason. Religion reinforces this by teaching that everything, even tragedy, is part of a divine plan. But in reality, life is chaotic. Good people suffer, terrible people thrive. Saying everything happens for a reason may feel comforting, but it ignores how randomness and injustice actually operate in the world. It discourages action by implying that intervention isn't needed because it's all being taken care of by some higher force. Also consider the false cause fallacy. This shows up in claims that religious belief leads to moral societies. Some argue that because a country is religious and also peaceful, the religion must be the reason. But this confuses correlation with causation. Many secular countries, like those in Scandinavia, have high levels of social trust, equality, and happiness without strong religious belief. Morality doesn't require belief in a deity. In fact, when morality is based on fear of punishment or hope for reward, it's not really morality, it's just obedience. We should also think about the way religion treats questions about origins. Many religious explanations for the beginning of life, the universe, or consciousness are based on the God of the gaps fallacy, inserting a deity wherever there's a lack of scientific explanation. But these gaps have been shrinking. Once, lightning, disease, and the seasons were attributed to gods. Now we understand them. History shows that using God as a placeholder for ignorance is a bad strategy. The more we learn, the less space there is for the supernatural. Organized religion also relies heavily on groupthink. Being part of a religious community often means agreeing with the group. Even if privately you have doubts, groupthink discourages dissent. It rewards conformity. This keeps belief systems stable, not because they're true, but because disagreement is socially punished. The truth isn't decided by vote or by tradition. It stands independently. Another significant fallacy that often props up religious thinking is anthropocentrism, the belief that humans are the center of existence. Many religious systems teach that the universe was created with us in mind, but the facts don't support that. The observable universe is unimaginably vast, trillions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, and most of it is hostile to life. Earth is a tiny, fragile speck in a cosmos that shows no sign of caring whether we live or die. If the universe was made for us, it's a strange way to design it, with nearly all of it completely inaccessible and deadly. Believing we are the central focus of such a universe isn't humble. It's deeply self-centered, and it shows how religion often appeals to our ego, not our reason. Another idea tied to this is teleological thinking, the assumption that everything exists for a purpose and that purpose was assigned. Religion teaches that everything happens to us or for us. But in reality, nature doesn't have intent. The lion doesn't eat the gazelle because of a cosmic lesson. Natural disasters don't strike to test faith. Hurricanes don't pick targets based on morality. Things just happen. The universe doesn't owe us meaning. We give meaning to things ourselves, and that's a deeper kind of meaning because it's chosen, not assigned. There's also a kind of false balance in how religion is discussed publicly. Whenever religion is criticized, there's a pressure to say something nice, to balance the conversation, even if that balance isn't warranted. This is often seen in debates or classrooms where religious views are given equal weight with scientific ones. But not all ideas are equal. Giving airtime to ideas without evidence in the name of fairness confuses people about what's actually true. It's like giving equal time to a flat earth theory in a geology class. It's not open-mindedness. It's misleading. The way organized religion handles authority structure also reveals logical contradictions. If God is perfect, why use deeply flawed people to spread his message? Why choose a system that involves popes, priests, and prophets who often contradict each other, abuse power, and make mistakes? Why rely on ancient languages and mistranslations to deliver eternal truth? If the message is so important, why make it so difficult to understand? These aren't just practical problems. They expose inconsistencies in the logic of divine communication. The vagueness fallacy is another layer. Religious claims are often too undefined to test. Words like spirit, divine energy, or soul are used without clear definitions. They sound deep, but they're too slippery to analyze. If you ask 10 people what a soul is, you'll get 10 different answers. If you can't define a concept clearly, you can't test it. And if you can't test it, you can't claim it's real. One of the more insidious fallacies is moral blackmail. The idea that criticizing religion is offensive or disrespectful. This is often used to shut down discussion. But ideas don't have rights. People do. You can respect someone's right to believe something without respecting the belief itself. Criticizing religion isn't an attack on individuals. It's an examination of claims that affect public policy, education, and life. If an idea can't handle criticism, it probably doesn't deserve power. Let's not ignore the use of false analogies, especially in apologetics. A common one is comparing the universe to a watch. If you found a watch on the ground, you'd assume it had a maker. So, the universe must have a creator, too. But a watch and the universe aren't the same kind of thing. A watch is man-made. And we know how watches are made. We don't have another universe to compare to. And assuming design just because something is complex skips over the need for actual evidence. Analogies can help explain things, but they don't prove anything. Another tactic is the redefinition of words to make claims sound more reasonable. Some religious thinkers redefine nothing in debates about the origin of the universe. They claim the universe couldn't come from nothing, but then redefine nothing in a way that supports their theology. Or they redefine atheism as just another belief system, to make it sound equally speculative. But redefining terms to win an argument is dishonest. Precision matters when you're trying to understand reality. The appeal to consequence is used often in emotional arguments, that life would be meaningless without God, or that morality would collapse. But whether or not something leads to a nice or frightening conclusion doesn't tell you if it's true. The universe doesn't owe us comfort. Beliefs should be accepted because they are supported by evidence, not because they make us feel better. Wanting a cosmic parent figure or a perfect afterlife doesn't mean either exists. There's a common bait-and switch in religious language. The word God is often introduced as a vague philosophical concept, a first cause, a cosmic principle. But once that's accepted, the conversation suddenly shifts to a specific deity with rules, rituals, and scriptures. This switch happens subtly, but it's not logical. Proving that the universe had a beginning doesn't prove the God of any religion. It just proves the universe had a beginning. The leap to a specific God with commandments and opinions is where the logic falls apart. Another problem is the moral outsourcing that religion encourages. Believers are taught that morality comes from divine command, not personal reasoning, but this can lead to dangerous outcomes. If morality is based on what a deity commands, then anything that deity says must be right, even if it includes genocide, slavery, or intolerance. This makes it impossible to judge moral actions on their own merits. It removes personal responsibility and replaces it with obedience. A truly moral act is done because it's right, not because it's ordered. Religion also distorts the concept of humility. It tells people they're broken, sinful, or fallen, and that their only hope is submission to divine will. This doesn't promote real humility. It promotes dependency. Real humility is recognizing our limitations and being open to new evidence. It's not thinking you're worthless. It's knowing you might be wrong and being willing to grow. Religion often confuses guilt with humility and obedience with virtue. The halo effect also plays a role. Religious leaders or texts are often given blanket trust because they are seen as holy. But being seen as moral doesn't mean someone's claims are accurate. Charisma, tradition, and robes don't equal truth. Many people trusted clergy or prophets only to be misled or harmed. The content of an idea matters more than the status of the person who says it. Another fallacy is the failure to define falsifiability. A belief that can't be tested, challenged, or disproven is not a meaningful claim. If every outcome is somehow compatible with belief, if success is proof of divine favor and failure is a test, then the belief explains everything and predicts nothing. That's not a theory. It's a belief bubble. Real knowledge has to be testable. Otherwise, it's just a story. Let's also talk about false attribution. Many people claim that religion invented morality, art, or law, but these things existed in many forms before formal religion and continue to exist without it. Secular legal systems are more fair and effective than religious courts. Secular art is just as meaningful, and people raised without religion still understand right from wrong. These are human achievements, not divine gifts. Finally, the most foundational fallacy in religion is faith itself. The idea that belief without evidence is a virtue. But belief without evidence isn't strength. It's surrender. It stops inquiry. It hands over your intellectual integrity to authority or tradition. Faith rewards certainty over curiosity. But truth doesn't need belief. It needs understanding. Faith asks for obedience. Reason asks for evidence. One of them can change when new information arrives. The other cannot. In many ways, religious belief thrives because it offers shortcuts. It gives quick answers to hard questions. It bypasses uncertainty. But these shortcuts come at a cost. They discourage independent thinking. They reduce curiosity. They teach people that it's more important to be right than to learn. That questions are threats rather than opportunities. That mystery should be solved with dogma instead of discovery. And finally, the most important fallacy of all, the illusion of certainty. Religion sells certainty in a world that offers none. It tells people they can know what happens after death, what the purpose of life is, what the ultimate truth is. But this certainty is borrowed, not earned. It's not based on evidence. It's based on repetition, authority, and emotional appeal. And while it may feel comforting, it often stands in the way of deeper understanding. Uncertainty isn't a weakness. It's the beginning of real inquiry. To say, "I don't know," is not an admission of failure. It's the most honest thing you can say in the face of mystery. The strength of the human mind isn't in clinging to answers. It's in asking better questions. It's in staying curious even when it's uncomfortable. And it's in being willing to let go of comforting stories when they don't align with reality. Organized religion has been built on centuries of tradition, power, and emotion. But when you peel away those layers, when you look closely at the actual arguments used to defend belief, you find a house of cards built on logical fallacies, appeals to ignorance, misused authority, circular logic, emotional manipulation, false dilemmas, all wrapped in the illusion of certainty. But reality doesn't need to be sacred to be meaningful. Life doesn't need to be eternal to matter. We are a part of a universe that is vast, mysterious, and indifferent. And in that indifference, we have the freedom to choose, to build lives of meaning, purpose, and connection. Not because we're told to, but because we can. Truth doesn't ask for faith. It asks for evidence. It doesn't fear questions. It welcomes them. And it doesn't promise certainty. It offers understanding, one question at a time.